My name's Dyson, and I'm the Executive Director here for the Challenge Prize Centre, and so hence I'm the person here to talk to you today about prizes. It was in 22nd of May, 1923, on a French airfield, that a plane came crashing down out of the sky, and hundreds of people rushed to meet the pilot that stepped out of this plane. This man was about to become the most famous man in the world, and his name was Charles Lindbergh, and the propeller plane that he'd just got out of was the Spirit of St. Louis. The reason that he was about to become the most famous man in the world was because he was the first person to have flown across the Atlantic. It took him nearly 48 hours to do it, and he was absolutely exhausted. The reason that he did it was because a French entrepreneur had put forward a cash prize of $25,000, a lot of money back then, for anyone who could fly between Paris and New York, or the other way around. At the time, they didn't know that there was an advantage to doing it one way rather than the other. He had brought forward, in doing this, aviation forward by about 10 years. At the time, the Americans had slipped behind the Europeans in the development of the aircraft, and he had brought them forwards in terms of the technology and development of the aircraft in that endeavor. Lots of other people had tried. Some people had died in the attempt in attempting to do it, but it was the Orteig Prize that really inspired that endeavor. And that's essentially what a challenge prize does. It offers a reward to whoever can first or most effectively meet a defined challenge. It sets a goal, and it inspires people to try and attempt to solve that goal. That goal, though, needs to be achievable, and it needs to achieve this balance between being just achievable but not too difficult to achieve. It needs to be somewhere, somewhere just within reach. And it needs to be able to inspire people in order to be able to get new people involved. That's the purpose, in a nutshell, of a prize. It began, the first prize, in 1714. The big problem at the time was, how do you measure longitude at sea? You can measure latitude fairly well, but longitude was pretty much a mystery. Great minds had tried, Galileo, Sir Isaac Newton, and had failed. And it was the fact that you couldn't measure longitude resulted in tens of thousands of deaths of sailors. And for a trading nation like the UK, not being able to effectively navigate the seas was a big problem. But there were some ideas about potential solutions. People thought it could be through watchmaking, or it could be through better star navigation. And people had a reasonable sense that one of these routes was going to come up with a solution, but they weren't sure where it might come from. And that's why the British government launched a huge prize of £20,000 to whoever could effectively measure longitude within half a degree between London and the West Midlands. It was the first time this method of saying, we don't care who comes up with the solution, we just want the solution, and we will award the prize to whoever can do it, was used. And it was John Harrison, a watchmaker from Grimsby, who came up with the solution which we now know as the chronometer. Much to the dismay of some of the establishment, you can imagine, they were likes of Sir Isaac Newton who wanted to try and crack this problem. But nonetheless, he came up with a chronometer. But it also inspired lots of other approaches as well, including the sextant and other sort of better lunar tables and telescopes and so on. So it created a whole movement of new approaches to better addressing the problem of measuring longitude. And that's the power of a prize. It creates a race and a competition and inspires the minds of the entrepreneurs and the innovators to try and solve that problem and come up with the solution. And there are other historical examples. I'll give you one more, which is from Napoleon. Napoleon is accredited with saying an army marches on its stomach. He didn't actually say that, but he might have done. In that conquering Europe, he was having difficulty feeding his troops. The countries that he were invading were not too inclined to help him out. And the methods of preserving food were pretty inadequate, drying food and that sort of thing. So he also launched a competition of 12,000 francs for whoever could effectively come up with a way of preserving food. And it was a confectioner, Nicolas Appert, who came up with a solution of heating up food and then putting it in airtight containers. He didn't quite understand why this worked, but it worked. And the airtight containers, because he was French, were obviously wine bottles. And this is the same method we use today in canning. It's exactly the same that we use for Heinz baked beans and everything else. So prizes have been used throughout history, but over the last 30 or 40 years, there's been a massive resurgence in the development of challenge prizes, particularly in North America, but also in the UK and Europe as well. And I think there are a number of reasons for that. One is that there's a big burgeoning of innovation. We always talk about we're in the new technical industrial revolution, but it's not consistent. So there are massive advances in data science, data processing, these sorts of things. But if you think about things like rocket technology, actually that hasn't moved on that much since the 1960s or 70s. But also, whilst we have all this innovation happening, there are also a lot of complex socio and economic and different problems that are emerging in our complex modern lives as well. And what challenge prizes do is they look for those gaps. So they look for where there is a problem, but where there isn't enough innovation happening. And that's essentially what it's doing. It's matching up innovators and encouraging innovators to address problems that are overlooked. And so in 2013, Nesta, in partnership with the UK government, set up the Challenge Prize Centre. And this was our first step into creating a European centre of expertise in the development of challenge prizes. And we started small, modestly, with 2 sets of challenge prizes. One was around cycling, and the other was with the UNDP, which is around creating renewable energy generators for off-grid refugees. The cycling challenges, there were 2 of them, were very small, £50,000 each. One was around improving access to, or increasing cycling to the workplace, and looking for innovations in that. It was a complete failure. If you want to incentivize people to cycle to work, put showers in or create work incentive schemes and all the rest of it. There was no problem there that needed to be solved by innovation, certainly not innovation that would be stimulated by £50,000. The other cycling challenge was around reducing bike theft. And the solution that came up there was a very novel bike lock that's gone on to be successful. But frankly, really, there's a lot of innovation happening in the cycling space when it comes to bike theft and so on. It didn't really need very much in the way of stimulus from us. On the other hand, our smallest prize, and it's still our smallest prize, was with the UNDP. And this was about creating a renewable energy generator for off-grid for refugees in Bosnia-Herzegovina. And basically, the criteria there was around creating more kilowatt energy at less cost than what currently existed that would be suitable for the needs of the communities, these long-term refugee communities in Bosnia-Herzegovina. And there, we spoke to a lot of people that understood engineering and the art of the possible to make sure that we had set that bar right, that it was possible to create an energy generator that produced this much energy at this cost. And we spent a lot of time speaking to communities to understand how much energy they needed. So we got the criteria right. And even though it was still, I think, our smallest prize that we've ever run, it was a success, and those generators are now being used in Bosnia-Herzegovina. So we've learned a lot since then about what does and doesn't work when it comes to prizes. So, when should you develop a prize now that we've learned all this stuff? Firstly, have you got a problem that requires innovation? This isn't just a question for should you do a challenge prize. This is a question for should you stimulate innovation in the first place? Is there a need to do this? And really, what you're looking for is a problem where there is a potential innovation can come in and make a significant difference on that problem. So there's an area that's overlooked in some way. Otherwise, why bother doing a challenge prize or any other type of stimulus when it comes to the development of innovation? Too often people start with, I want to do a challenge prize. You should start with the problem and then decide what type of innovation intervention that you need. Now, we do a lot, for example, in the disability space. And disability is a really prime area for the development of challenge prizes, including one that we run at the moment with the Toyota Mobility Foundation. And this is looking for technologies that would improve the mobility of people with lower limb paralysis. The reason this is a really good area for a challenge prize is because very little advances have happened in the development of technology for people with lower limb paralysis, really since the wheelchair. There are things, there are exoskeletons being developed and all the rest of it, but it's pretty slow and it's pretty poor. Whereas you look outside to other sectors where technology is having massive advances in the fields of AI and robotics and new materials science, and these things have great applicability when it comes to lower limb paralysis. And that's why we launched a challenge, because there is the potential for innovation. It's not currently being deployed when it comes to lower limb paralysis. And so our role is to create that competitive environment that turns people's heads and gets their focus and attention. And as I said, we've done that with a number of different inclusive technology areas where there's also significant market opportunity at the end of it, but people are perhaps just not aware of it. So just some criteria about when a prize is needed. So firstly, is there a goal? Have you got a clear idea around what you want to achieve and why? Is there a reason to open this up to new innovators? A lot of the time, there's great stuff out there. You just need to invest in it, give it grant funding, shine a light on it. You don't need to find new innovation. It already exists. So be clear, do you need to bring in new innovators? And would a prize motivate them? It's all very well saying, yeah, innovation could come in and make this difference. But you need to understand, would those innovators stop doing what they're doing and address your particular problem? And if they're not going to do that, then again, there's not much point in doing a challenge prize. And then the key thing is it going to be viable afterwards? There's no point coming up with a solution if there isn't a market opportunity for it at the end of it. Again, this is true with many types of innovation funding. It's all very well to come up with shiny innovation, but it has to have a use. It's got to exist at the end of it. I'll give you a couple of examples. Dynamic demand was a challenge that we ran a few years ago. Here, the problem was, how do you create ways in which people can use electricity at off-peak times and therefore use much more clean and renewable energy rather than using energy at peak times? The reason that this was a problem was because there wasn't a market for it. Your energy tariffs don't differentiate for it. But the introduction of smart metering is starting to enable this type of tariff-type approach being possible, and you can see a future where that's going to be possible in the future. Plus, there are people who are genuinely interested in using energy that is cleaner and greener. So we wanted technologies that could come in, make the use of the new available data sets, and come up with new technologies that were able to do that. And the teams that came in and came up with the solutions have now gone on to raise millions of pounds and scale up on a real scale. Some of them are in the room this evening. And these are people that wouldn't otherwise have solved that challenge. And that's a key success criteria for any challenge prize. Would it have happened anyway? If it would have happened anyway, it wasn't worth doing. Another example is a challenge we ran for USAID last year, which is the Data-Driven Farming Prize. Here, the massive boom in mobile technology and data science means an awful lot is possible in terms of providing information to people. And the problem that we focused on with USAID was agricultural productivity for smallholder farmers in Nepal who have access to rudimentary mobile phones and information systems. And that challenge attracted people from all around the world who had the knowledge of these different technologies and very innovative approaches to come in and develop these models for smallholder farmers in Nepal. So clear goal, accelerated progress, new entrants came in, and it motivated the innovators. And I'll give you one last example with the Genomics X Prize. So this was around speeding up genome sequencing. So could you sequence 100 genomes for less than $10,000? And this was a $10 million prize launched in 2006. So it had a very, very clear goal. It was a complete failure, though. And the reason it was a complete failure was because you didn't need to incentivize people to do genome sequencing. The market opportunity is enormous. There are only a small number of universities and research companies that can do this, and they were doing it anyway. And they completely underestimated the advance of science and technology, and it just went ahead leaps and bounds and just made the prize irrelevant. So it's all very well having a clear problem and a clear goal, but you need to have a good understanding that there are innovators that can be incentivized to come in and do something about it.